you very much, Larry, for your remarks. Thank you to Rich for the invitation to respond. I'll have a couple of parts to my response, full-throated endorsement of big chunks of the message, a few points of nuance here or there, and just sharing some thoughts on my own experience in this area. I did teach a MOOC on Coursera, my mythology class that I've taught in different forms over years. I taught it on Coursera in the fall, and I had 56,000 students sign up for it. That was enough. I mean, that was enough to get my attention. And I had colleagues at the time. This was back in the Stone Age of MOOCs 9 months ago, and I had colleagues at the time from universities that had signed on to the same project, sidling up to me, saying how much they disagreed with the whole prospect, saying, you know, the name of our university actually means something. I didn't know how to interpret that remark aside from just being vaguely hostile, and full speed ahead to see what we could make of it. Of that 56,000, a smaller percentage did a lot of work with it. A smaller percentage than that did all the requirements I asked them to do. But still, the total number of people that did every single piece of the course that I asked them to do was larger than the total number of students I've ever taught in a lifetime of actual teaching. Now, I went into the prospect with very strong ambivalence, equal parts enthusiasm, somewhat full-throated on occasion, but also trepidation. And both those pieces of my reaction have survived through the course. I am still enthusiastic about it, and I still have trepidations. I just want to have a couple of ways of framing, I think, what we've said, and it's basically taking a message that Larry's already given us. It's been famously referred to as an iron triangle of issues in higher ed of access, cost, and assessment. I don't know of anything else that's happened in the academy to press harder on these three issues than what's happening with MOOCs. Access, problem solved. You just need an internet connection. Not fully solved, but roughly solved. Cost, zero. Okay. Take those two pieces of the iron triangle and put them to the side. Assessment, interestingly, I think is being provoked by this disruption in our normal way of doing things. Those that are all for MOOCs are entering a world of people who very thoughtfully have for a long time used calibration, measurement by quantity to figure out what it is they want to do and to measure how they got it on the outside as an outcome. People in my discipline, in classics, and maybe even generally in the humanities, are still kind of allergic to the idea that you could quantify what we're trying to do in a classroom. Getting into the MOOC world, I think, introduces you to a world of thoughtful people that know how to do this. And I realize that I'm speaking to a group of people that probably doesn't need any convincing of the prospect that things we really care about are actually quantifiable and measurable, but just to testify to the third of the world out there, the academic world and the humanities, that group is likely to need some persuading that these things are ready to come. So getting involved in MOOCs enters you into that world. It also, for those who still find this prospect to be not the right way to go, the argument will instantly come, well, they learn more in my traditional classroom they could ever learn online, at which point you say, oh, how do you know? And an urgency all of a sudden hovers down on the academic world that says, well, let's figure out how much students are learning in my classroom. We have not had an urgent issue with teeth in it, I think, in the way that this one does, that has created an incentive, an interest, a provocative interest on all sides of the issue to figure out what students are learning in the classroom. This is just happening, and I think it's extraordinarily useful, beneficial, helpful for those of us schooled in the Teagle way, as I'll label Rich's outlook on what we've done, and Bob Connor before that. We've been looking, and the foundation has been looking very carefully at this for a decade, and I think MOOCs are just making it come right to light. Now, all of this, I think, leads to questions about what the most important thing that we care about, of what happens in our classrooms. And the disruptiveness of this technology is obvious and very interesting for what happens in the classrooms. A few things I've heard in the conversations I've been involved in, I've heard colleagues say that what this is doing is making a different kind of professor. In the end, what we're all going to be is DJs instead of divas. So we're not going to do the stand and deliver, sage on the stage mode. What we're going to be is really good aggregators of all the great content that's out there. It's not just going to be a matter of choosing a good textbook and then you poo-poo it even though you make your students read it. It's a matter of saying, well, why didn't you do something a little better than that textbook? Take, Professor X from Johns Hopkins on topic of week 7 and take Professor Y from University of Washington on topic of week 6. Of course you should. That's what everyone does. Eventually we'll get to the world where the amount of resources out there to teach a live class are proliferating, and it will be dizzying to try to keep up with it all, but as people do, the bar will get raised. And only those who will claim, I think, well, anyway, I won't. There's a few comments about the raising of the salience of teaching of all of this that are important to be brought to the table. It's just happening much more than it has in the past. In terms of the enthusiasms, I think you can see in the way I've shaped these questions. Let me just close with a couple of others that share my reticence about what's happening and my concerns. One way that this, this issue was framed for me when I was shown a comic from the 1930s from the Smithsonian Magazine, and it had a professor with, he was smoking and he had facial hair, and he was behind a podium, but the podium had a camera on it, and it had a microphone, and it had wires and tubes and transistors, and there was a big antenna on the top of his building, and his image was being beamed out across to people with television sets all over the city. Now the barriers were dropped. The technology of being able to recreate what happens in the classroom was there. The enthusiasm was there. The future of education clearly was now going to follow TV. It seems quaint now to even suggest such a thing because all of us know a little better about TV. TV, it turns out, the medium is not all that good to do substantive, long-form intellectual work. It's great for delivering, 20-minute satirical comedy shows. It's great for delivering sports. I mean, it's good for some things, but it's not good for long-form, serious intellectual work. We have so far, I think, sprinted into this new future without a lot of questions about whether the medium is adequate for the kind of message that we want to be sending through it. And the discussion sometimes about, for example, the flipped classroom, toss out the lecture, the presumptions are, well, of course the lecture as we know it is broken. I don't know if that's true. I think, sure, lots of them should be better. But there are some of them that do something that's irreplaceable and that actually you can't quite make happen on an online environment. It's true that 50 minutes is maybe not the optimum way by which people learn. But it may also be true that 10-minute little video segments on your computer is not the optimum way in which people learn. We're going that direction, not because we think it's the best way people learn, it's because that's the medium. And we're now adjusting to this medium. It could be in the end that 6-minute segments are the right ones or 27-minute segments. I mean, I don't know. What is the best way that people learn? And to hear the talk today shows us that there are people that know some answers to these questions. We should be listening to them as we're shaping this. And instead, what I got in the Coursera thing was a lot of people who kind of learned that online video clips should be no more than 10 minutes. Because that's online video clips. It was not about an educational mission. So while the discussion and the disruption that's happening here is exactly the right kind of thing, I think it's touching all the third rails that should be touched and that otherwise won't be. So I think there's really tremendous potential here. But I think we need to continue to go into this realizing the things that are possible, but also hang on to the things that we can do uniquely. And it was particularly in the closing remarks that Larry's talk, where Larry came in his closing remarks, that I wanted to just say I could not agree more. We need better messaging about what it is that we do. The stand and deliver, all these other things that come up, sage on the stage, these are categories that come up when you have something else. Another way of looking at it, well, another category that's coming up now is residential education. We didn't have that category so much 9 months ago. Now all of a sudden we really have it. And because there's an alternative to what that is, it gives us a chance to focus on it and develop better, more persuasive kinds of messaging about what it is we're up to. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague respondent. Stephen Zucker is the co-dean of art and history at the Khan Academy.